Education, not indoctrination. That is the topic of tonight's byline. Oscar Wilde once famously said that the problem with socialism is that it takes up too many evenings. Sadly, the same can be said for fighting socialism. Most people in Canada, even NDP voters, they actually reject socialism. They might like certain aspects of what the party stands for. They might even want free stuff, but they don't embrace socialism. The socialists don't like this, and so they've been trying for generations to find other ways to push their views in society. Thus, the wholesale takeover of much of the university system, especially the social sciences and arts. But most worrisome is their takeover of education faculties and teacher training. I've told you about OISE before. It's the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and it's the most influential teacher training institution in Canada. Unlike Vegas, what happens at OISE does not stay at OISE. It migrates to your local faculty of education. From there, it goes into the brains of teachers and would-be teachers and eventually into the classrooms of our local schools. So what is OISE pushing now? Well, beyond garden variety socialism and communism, they've published a calendar. It's an interesting calendar. It's one that marks the birthday of Ontario's premier because let's all celebrate the politician that just gave teachers a $500 million raise. Cake for all the kiddies. They also make sure to include David Suzuki's birthday, Socialist MP and, former MP and ring thief Swen Robinson, his birthday's marked along with others. But the birthday info, that's small potatoes. The good stuff, dug up by the blog Socialist Studies, is all about the groups that OISE chooses to promote. I Don't Know More, a movement that wants to strip away individual rights in favor of collective rights for Canada's First Nations people, the movement that doesn't want women to have on reserves to have the same rights when their marriages break up as women off reserve. They're celebrated. It's an odd choice on so many levels, but hardly surprising. The Quebec student movement, the one that smashed windows, torched cars, threatened violence to students that attended classes, and instilled fear across Montreal last year. Yep, they're heroes in this calendar. Occupy Toronto, they're given a blessing by OISE. The people that train teachers and help set curriculum love smashing the 1%. We'll have more on that false narrative later. But OISE celebrates Occupy Toronto and the movement in general, and they do it in the month of July. The same month, they make sure to tell everyone to mark the birthday of Miguel Figueroa. Who's he? Well, he's the leader of the Communist Party of Canada, of course. Everyone knows that. Why not celebrate communists and communism? I mean, capitalism sucks. It says so in the signs that are present in the protest photos. The oddest group that OISE supports, though, is one called No One is Illegal. This is a very strange group, one that many people on the far left, they try not to hang around them because they're that weird. Not OISE, not the people that shape educational thought across Canada. They embrace No One is Illegal. But what exactly is this group? What's No One is Illegal? What are they all about? Well, they don't believe in Canada's immigration laws. They fight to stop deportation of any kind, and they want an open border. You know, everyone's legal to come into Canada. But they also think that we're all settlers living on stolen land that belongs to First Nations people. They call Canada Turtle Island. In fact, they don't even recognize Canada.
No One is Illegal is a migrant justice organization, but we also stand firm that Canada is an occupying state on colonized land, that this Turtle Island is Indigenous territory, and so we stand in solidarity and support the fight for Indigenous sovereignty.
Yeah, it all makes sense, doesn't it? Is it any wonder that we hear of schools celebrating this or celebrating people like Che Guevara, the executioner for Castro during his Cuban Revolution? Is it any wonder that we end up with social justice questions in math that rail against military spending and ask the children to, in math, remember, they asked them to redistribute the income? Now, most teachers aren't interested in this. Most teachers are good people that got into the job for the right reason. But they're having this stuff pushed on them by the educrats, by the people at places like OISE that develop curriculum for students, that develop teacher training courses for faculties of education, that develop the course material for teacher workshops on PD days. Those good teachers need your help to fight back. This is why parents and grandparents need to be aware, why they need to get involved. That's why you need to be asking what was talked about at school. Don't ask what your kids learned at school today. They'll always say nothing. But ask what was talked about at school. That is vitally important around the dinner table. We don't need this kind of information, this kind of material in our schools, and saving our kids from being indoctrinated. might mean we have to give up a few nights as well. And that's the byline.
Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. Roll, do it again. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
Joining me now for further discussion on the craziness in education is Richard Klagsbrun. He's a blogger and parent and concerned citizen regarding education. And Richard, you often break stories about the craziness going on in education at your blog, Eye in a Crazy Planet. Kudos to you and the people behind Socialist Studies and so many others for exposing this, because it quite often it goes unnoticed. People are busy. Even education reporters have to focus on the official material coming out so often, and this stuff just sits in the background till people like you find it.
Sure, it's a really troubling series of events that's going on, series of things that are happening in the education system that are really outrageous. One of the things I'll say about OISE, the institution we've been talking about, is that what they should do to students when they come in is teach them how to say, would you like extra foam on your latte? Because that way at least they'd have one piece of knowledge that has practical application for their future careers. It's a crazy place where they're jamming the most radical forms of politicized activism, of socialism, of anti-capitalism. They're ramming it down the students' throats there. And they're trying to form curriculums which are doing it in as young an age as elementary schools, which is really outrageous.
You and I have talked about this before. I mentioned in the monologue the social justice appearing in math. I was speaking with Michael Zwagster about changes in math and how they don't teach basic functions, times tables. You know, some teachers, God bless them, my kids have some of them, they're in there, they're trying to teach the kids times tables and basic functions. But quite often it's pulled out in favor of creative math and social justice math, where, no, let's not talk about what's 2 times 2? What's 5 times 5? No, let's talk about how we can redistribute the military spending into social programs to eliminate poverty. That's not a math question, but that's what you get from places like OISE.
Absolutely right. And one of the other things that's going on in the education system, we keep hearing about social justice. Now, there's no term that's so completely devoid of any actual meaning as social justice. It can mean whatever you like it to mean. And they use it because if you're opposed to whatever they're teaching, well, you're against justice. So,
you know, and this is a term that has, for certain religious groups, has specific meanings. For Catholics, even for Baptists and others, that, you know, it means going in, feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, housing the homeless. That social justice, a lot of the claptrap they're attaching to it is not. It is socialism.
That's completely correct. They're pushing people like Che Guevara. They're celebrating Castro's Cuba in the name of social justice. Now, if you know, as you know, what goes on in Castro's Cuba, if you know what Che Guevara stood for, the totalitarianism, the deprivation of rights and free speech, that's not justice. So there really isn't such a thing as social justice. There's only justice. And it either exists or it doesn't exist in certain circumstances. And what social justice, the euphemism social justice, so frequently stands for is an absolute deprivation of justice. And going back to OISE, one of the things that they've done recently, which is a complete slap in the face to any taxpayer in Ontario, anyone who believes in the principles of fact-based education, is that they've assigned a new head of their social justice education department, a person named Abigail Bacan. She's a person who's one of the founders of the International Socialists. She was a speaker at an Al-Quds event a couple of years ago.
Remind people what Al-Quds is.
For those not familiar with it, it is a holiday created by Iran's totalitarian dictator, the Ayatollah Khomeini, for the purpose of eliminating Israel. And the particular event she spoke at was organized by a group called CASMO, the Canadian Association of Shiite Muslims, a group that had posted videos by the neo-Nazi leader David Duke. And at this particular event, she discussed how Israel is exactly like pre-1994 apartheid South Africa. Now, to say that, someone would either have to be an imbecile or a politicized liar who's trying to push a line of propaganda. But that's who is now in charge of social justice at at OISE. She's also a person who has her own, she's on the editorial board of a conspiracy website called The Canadian Charger that pushes 9/11 conspiracy theories. I don't know what her views on 9/11 are, but I know that she's pushed her own conspiracy theories, one of which is that Barack Obama's election was organized by the political elites to replace racism against African Americans with Islamophobia. Another one of her crazy things that she's gone about speaking of is that Jesse Jackson was prevented from becoming president of the United States because of a plot of a racist plot. Had nothing to do with Democratic voters.
Yeah, okay.
This kind
We're
of
almost
stuff.
out of time. I want to ask you about the issue of pushing back, because we can expose craziness in this place all day long.
Sure.
With about 30 seconds left, you've been pushing back in schools and at school boards for years. Is it more effective to push back at your local school, at the school board level, or just with your own kids at the dinner table?
Well, I think you have to take a multi-pronged approach, and not just at the school board level, but also at the provincial level, because it's the province that's responsible for the curriculum. So you have to talk to your kids. You have to make sure that they're aware of things. You have to get involved with your local school board, and you have to speak out about it with your friends, family, anyone who knows, because most people simply aren't aware of what's going on in the school system, and they're shocked when they learn about it.
All right, Richard, great talking to you as always. We'll chat again soon.
Very good.
Email me your thoughts, email me your horror stories of the education system, and especially if you're a teacher dealing with this garbage being pushed at you. I want to hear from you. Byline at sunmedia.ca.